Hi, welcome to the Tech F1 show. This is the Korean edition, looking back at the Grand Prix that the teams have just visited. And obviously I look at the technical side of the sport. So without further ado, let's start off with Red Bull Racing. The informed team, the team that everybody else has to beat. And obviously in Korea, once again, we see that Sebastian Vettel had the pace over the rest of the field. So what really defines their pace? There's lots of contributing factors. I wrote an article about that recently, and what I classified as the perfect storm. It's difficult to quantify everything that goes on with Red Bull Racing in regards to how different they are compared to the rest of the teams. You know, there's so many different variables that are involved. You can't just specifically pinpoint it to one particular component. But if you have a look at what the team took new to Korea, on this front wing here, that I put the pictures up on Twitter throughout the race weekend, which is something that I always do, and it's something that Sutton Images allow me to do. So if we have a look at this front wing, it was first tested by Mark Webber in free practice, and what it is there's two little strakes, vertical strakes, that have been added behind the main cascade here. Now, you can have a look at it in the blown out section here, down the bottom here. This is from the free practice session when Mark Webber was testing it, and it has flow visualization all over the actual strakes, just to see if they're doing the purpose that they were built for. What those strakes are intended to do is help to guide the airflow that would be received underneath the cascade and by the flaps themselves, and help them to turn the airflow around the front tyre. Because of their orientation, they're working in unison with one another to try and vorticize the flow that heads out in that direction, and they should obviously also have an impact on how the actual wing planes work themselves as well. An interesting feature here that Formula One management have started to put out into the broadcast media, and that's the infrared cameras that we see on board the cars. I highlight this particular picture as plenty of people ask me about it on Twitter, and I have another article coming up about it. This is from Mark Webber's car, and it's looking back from the nose towards the rear of the car. So obviously what the cameras are trying to point out is how the tyre heats, and the way that dissipates when you go into a braking zone. So obviously the temperatures start to cool. Obviously we can see here some latent heat in the side pod, which is probably more to do with the exhaust gases that are being produced at the rear. So that's probably not side pod, not the radiator per se, but the exhaust that sits in behind it. But what people were interested about on Twitter when they spoke to me was the heating of the T-tray just here. And as I say, I've got another article coming up on it, so I won't cover it too drastically. But what's actually happening is the Red Bull splitter is made up of a section that fits to the front edge of the splitter to protect the plank. The plank's made from J-Brock, which is wood, and it can be measured by the FIA at the end of the race to make sure that the plank hasn't been deflecting and hitting the floor too much, because obviously there's potential for more downforce to be generated with the splitter being in what we call ground effect. So the splitter has obviously a metal edge to it, but also interestingly what Red Bull have done is that the top element of the splitter is also predominantly made of metal, and what happens is the heat transfers from the section that's underneath the splitter, or the leading edge of the splitter, and transfers to the top edge of the splitter, and that's why we see this intense heat as the splitter's deflecting onto the floor. It's just a transference of the heat. Now I do think that there's an ongoing thermodynamic and aerodynamic effect that's in play in regard to that particular device that Red Bull have come up with, and it's all to do with how the fact that the airflow gets underneath the car and obviously onwards to the diffuser. I don't want to go into it too technically here, because there's plenty to talk about, and I could probably go on for about another 10 minutes regarding that particular issue. But if you keep an eye on the site over the next few days, there'll be another article in regards to that heated T-tray splitter. This is the close-up of the splitter that I was just talking about, and as we can see, obviously, you've got the plank that fits underneath the splitter. The splitter is the section that comes out from the chassis and protects the plank itself. You do have a couple of aerodynamic devices that are around the outside here to help with guiding airflow onwards towards the side pods and the underfloor area. And this is another view that I picked up from Monza. It's something that the team does on a regular basis, and that is that they actually drill sections into the metal sections of the splitter, and that's because they're obviously using it as a heat sink. As I say, they're drawing hot sections of the metal from the bottom and allowing it to escape on the upper element. A bit of a close-up again, just so that you can see the drill holes, of which there is plenty. They do tend to always have them in the same sort of orientation for when they do these drill holes in the splitter. Obviously the first picture that I showed you there, that was in free practice, and they hadn't actually added the holes to the front edge of the splitter. Now this is something that maybe I've been a bit slow on the uptake in regards to, but I did write another piece about this a few days ago, following on from the piece that I wrote about the perfect storm of Red Bull and how they're actually generating what they are. Since the teams have had to go back to the 2012 construction after Silverstone, when we had the tyre failures, teams have kind of been a little bit on the back foot, because they've obviously learned quite a bit about how to alter the airflow in consideration for the 2013 tyres or the early 2013 tyres. But now we find that obviously they're back on the 2012 construction. They've had to make some backward steps to allow them to deal with the differences that the tyres actually create. The 2013 tyres had a less stiff sidewall, so that they would squish basically and have a different aerodynamic effect. So if we have a look here, this is the car from Hungary. On this particular diffuser, it's the version that they were running for most of the first part of the season, and what they were trying to do was outwardly push the airflow to try and eliminate some of the tyre squirt that is generated. Tyre squirt is when the airflow impinges on the diffuser, it flows laterally in towards the diffuser. So if we have a quick look at the magnified section on this particular diffuser, we'll see that it leads outwards. It's a fairly innocuous design, it's not as complex as the newer design. And the diffuser gurney, the gurney's the trim that runs across the top here. Some teams don't have a perforation, whereas Red Bull do. That helps to create a counter-rotating vortice and helps to further extract airflow. It's a complex area of the diffuser, so you could talk about that again in completely its own show. But this is the Hungary version, and the version that they ran for most of the first part of the season. If we take a look at Monza, this is when obviously we have the new, or the older 2012 construction tyre, and you can see that the team have made an alteration to the way in which they're approaching the outward diffuser design. The central portion of the design stayed pretty similar, and there's something on the Red Bull design that is different to the other teams, and that's the central strakes in the middle of the diffuser. They've actually got a small perforation in the side to allow airflow to travel between the two sections. Important design aspect of the diffuser is the way that it operates in yaw, which is when the car's turning. So obviously you want to generate the most downforce in that particular area rather than on the straights. So yeah, if we look at the enlarged version just in the corner here, we'll see that the diffuser gurney now, in the outer portion, doesn't have its perforation, and the perforation is more centralised, much like we see Mercedes use and Lotus use, and that's just the way that they wanted to deal with the low downforce circuits rather than their higher downforce setup. And it's all to do with the 2012 tyres and the way that their sidewall is much stiffer. Now, this is what I found at the Korean Grand Prix. So I actually then went back and looked into these particular details on the diffuser. This is a picture from Singapore, and if we look at the enlarged picture just here, we can see that firstly the diffuser gurney continues around the periphery of the diffuser itself. You don't have that unperforated section on the corner. But what was the most interesting aspect that I find is this little scroll that's been put on the end of the diffuser itself. Now what that's doing is it's having airflow coming in from here, which is obviously generated by the exhaust plume itself, and also the natural airflow that comes around the car. Comes around into this pinch point at the bottom of the diffuser, and as I say, there's a little scroll at the bottom here which will vorticize the airflow and do a better job of what they were trying to do with the original diffuser, further helping to pull or extract the downforce outwards from the diffuser itself. So that is another principal reason why I believe Red Bull have found some of their pace. Over the years, they've perhaps been the best team at exploiting the diffuser and exhaust blowing diffusers. Their cross-under tunnel is perhaps the most accurate of the designs, especially with the 2012 construction of tyre. It's another element that I talked about in my main Red Bull piece, contributing to the perfect storm, but it is one of the major factors with the Red Bull design. Now this is the picture that I found at Korea, and it's what started me off down this path. Another great picture by Sutton as usual, with the wheel off. It allowed me to see the pinch point or the scroll at the end of the diffuser here. You can see it in the magnified section at the top here, and as I say, that just helps to create a vortice that spirals off the tip of the diffuser and helps to extract more performance from the diffuser itself. Right, moving on to Ferrari. Again, obviously trying to play catch up against Red Bull, who've pulled out a bit of a gap over the last few races. Been talk about certain aspects of the car that perhaps teams didn't, or not the teams, but the media and the public didn't think were legal. But if we move on to Ferrari, as we can see from here, they retained the multi-element front wing that they took to Singapore. I refer to it as a multi-element one because it's got the extension all the way across the flaps, whereas previously their old wing cut short of that, and the central section here didn't have the perforations. What was new for Ferrari on the F138 was the side pod airflow conditioner. They've made an alteration there, and I think it's something that they learned from the specification that they took to Montreal and subsequently dropped, which was the one that curved over the top of the side pod and created the side pod fins. That was a fairly drastic development from Ferrari and dropped it almost instantly, even though they raced it at Montreal. Now obviously that was firstly due to the fact that it was a low to medium downforce circuit, and then obviously we went to different circuits from there onwards. But also I think it's got more to do with the fact that Ferrari realised that there was more potential to be gained elsewhere and had to adopt a different strategy. Now the leading edge of the side pod airflow conditioner actually arcs outwards much more than the rearward section, just like the Montreal specification one, and it's all about how the airflow migrates towards the rear of the side pod and the exhaust plume, because obviously that's where they want to extract the most of the downforce. Now their old side pod airflow conditioner had another perforation at the base of it. That's been removed on this new version, and what we've got instead is an R cascade, an R vein, which protrudes from the edge of the floor and shaped like an R, and that's why we call it an R vein. We see those on the front wings, which we call R cascades. Now that particular component will generate a similar sort of vortex that the original arrangement was doing, and help with the airflow downwards. At the rear of the car, the team arrived with a new beam wing. As we can see, it's got quite a variation on its design. It's a much deeper affair, but at the outer trim sections, it slims down. So what that's looking to do is create downforce in the centralised section of the rear wing and help with extraction from the centre of the diffuser and the centre of the rear wing, because inherently the beam wing does help with the way that these two airflows are conditioned as well, but also reduce the drag on the outer elements, which will of course also help at the rear wing and again at the diffuser. Right, moving on to Mercedes, another team that have perhaps over the last few races taken a minor step backwards. Obviously the team are far advanced compared to where they have been in the past. I would say that they've actually made the biggest leap this season, although they haven't made the leap to the front. Technically they are the most improved team up the grid. So if we have a look at their front wing, perhaps their only real upgrade for the Grand Prix, we can see in this enlarged section here that what they've done is added a couple of the vertical straights in front of the rearward straights onto the flaps here. A design that was first done by Red Bull a few races ago and they've subsequently dropped, but it's something that a few of the other teams have taken up. Force India use it, and as I'll show you in a moment, there's a couple of the other teams that have decided to get on that bandwagon. And what it actually does is it will separate the flow in yaw so that the airflow stays attached better to the rearward strakes. It's all about managing the airflow and aiding in that. It also has the onward effect of being able to declutter the front wing in regards to marbles on the track. So if a driver comes across any marbles, these little fins might help protect the slot gaps a little bit and clear up the airflow. A little close up of that just so that you can see the little shark fins that we've got there in front on the flap. Moving back to drag reduction, and Mercedes once again tried their drag reduction device. Lotus have already said that they're not going to run it again this season, now that they've gone for the long wheelbase C21, but Mercedes are still persevering with it through practice. I think it's more to do with the way that they're trying to see how their car can be set up throughout free practice rather than the ability to actually use that device, but we shall see if it gets a race. The only time we've seen drag reduction the drag reduction device in a race so far is Kimi Raikkonen's E21 at Silverstone, and for something that's been pretty much developed since the middle, well, even the start of 2012 in the case of Lotus, all the way throughout that season and this up to this point, to only have seen it in one race is quite staggering, to be perfectly honest. But it is very difficult to tune, obviously. Right, and moving on to Lotus. As I've already mentioned, Lotus have brought forward their long wheelbase version, which extends the wheelbase by about 100mm, 100 to 120mm. And what they've done is they've rearranged the suspension area. They did take the car to Monza, which Kimi Raikkonen tried out in free practice. I don't believe the drivers think there's much of a difference in comparison to the older version, but it was shown in simulation that they would get an advantage from it, and it would help to balance front to rear, allowing for better tyre wear. So the team opted to go for it anyway. I would imagine it's been an expensive operation to cater for. And what we can see here when Kimi came off the track in Korea is what they had to change around the T-tray area because the FIA had some issues with that particular region of the car, and that's the reason why we haven't seen the car raced so far this season. But what Lotus have changed, and I'm not specifically saying that this is why the FIA had umbrage with it, but if we look at the stay, the T-tray, splitter tray at the bottom of the picture here, it's actually been flipped over. The old one used to rotate this way, whereas obviously it rotates forward towards the leading edge of the tray now. Another perhaps aerodynamic advantage gained in that particular region. That is another onward advantage that the extra wheelbase gives you, because you've got that extra margin of bodywork to play with, so they can have a longer nose and create some different aerodynamic advantages from the extra the extra space in the chassis. Now if we look at this particular picture here, we can see there's two different front wings at play. The original front wing is the one at the top and the new one is at the bottom. It's a very, very marginal change. Most people probably wouldn't have seen it, but it's only the holding section of the cascade element, which on the old configuration front wing sits here, and on the new one we've got a dog leg attachment. Now there's probably a couple of reasons as to why the Lotus have made that minor change. Firstly, the airflow. Obviously with the holder being in this position here, it will affect the way that this particular device here works, but also it might be to do with the way that the cascade moves around under flow conditions. So you know, when the car's in yaw or the suspension's in operation, so the car's moving up and down, the cascade itself might operate in a different dynamic with the difference in position. So that's the reason why we'll have seen that minor change. Moving on to McLaren, a team that have obviously benefited from the 2012 or the return to the 2012 tyres. They've helped in the fact that McLaren made some design decisions at the start of their car which has impacted on the way that it's evolved over the season, or not evolved in that case. The team obviously now are fully focused on the 2014 car, and we're really only seeing upgrades that are track specific or will help with the 2014 Challenger. So in this picture here, I mentioned this in my roundup from Singapore. The team were trying out the difference between 3 and 4 vortex generators on the top of the side pod, and for Korea they decided that they were going to make it 4. So all that does is it helps in the way that the airflow migrates over the top of the side pod down towards the exhaust plume. Moving on to Sauber, another team that have really benefited from the change back to the 2012 tyre. Perhaps happened a little too late in their season for it to give them a big advantage. A great drive by Nico Hülkenberg, holding off some what you would classify as better drivers, although I would say that Nico is perhaps underrated purely because he hasn't driven for a top field team. So if we have a look again at the front wing arrangements on the Sauber, we can see that another one of those little small strikes has appeared on the front wing. Sauber's front wing is not changed drastically over the last sort of 2 years in terms of design. They have minor changes here and there. They also ran a different cascade arrangement for the low downforce circuits at Spa and Monza, but their design ethos is pretty much unchanged. They run a 3-tier wing with the 4th tier being made up of the dogleg strake at the rear of the wing, which is where the strake itself evolves overwards towards the rear of the end plate and makes the 4th tier. This is something that's been run on the car for quite some time, but because I don't usually cover the lower tier teams, and I've been asked to recently, I thought I'd show you this picture. It's something quite interesting on the Sauber that we don't really see on the rest of the cars. This little fin, skirt fin, that we see underneath the chassis here, just helping to envelope the airflow in that region towards the side pod. I'm not quite sure why the other teams haven't picked up on that, but we'll see if they do in the future with the new chassis designs. Right, looking at the rear of the car here, we can see that the team evolved back to the spoon rear wing. It was something that they couldn't use with the 2013 early season tyres, because their exhaust solution just wasn't working perfectly. So they had to go back to a more conventional rear wing, so that they could create some dirty downforce as such. Moving to Toro Rosso, obviously again another team that I haven't really covered drastically over the season because of their position. It's always easier to talk about the top teams because they're the ones that we see the biggest performance advantages coming from. But there's something on the side pods of the STR8 that I wanted to show you. they actually ran these new vortex generators at Singapore, but I thought I'd mention them here at Korea. They're a new design, much more upstanding, i.e. they're higher. There's 3 of them, whereas I believe the older specification was 2, and the older version was much shallower. It's all about, again, like I said with McLaren, getting that vorticized airflow down to the exhaust plume and helping it over a wider speed range. That's effectively what these do, is they help over a wider speed range because the side pod can only operate within a certain airflow window. Here's the old ones, which, as I say, there's 2 of, much shallower design. So it's just a change from the Toro Rosso team to try and extract more downforce from their exhaust configuration. Here's the rearward version of the side pod, which I always find interesting, the frontal portion of the STR8. It's another copy from the STR7, but what they've done is they create a detached area at the front of the side pod here to allow the airflow that comes in the side pod. There's a certain section of that airflow that they allow to then re-escape out of that edge of the side pod, and help with the airflow regime that continues over the side pod. Obviously there's the new 3 vortex generators on top of the side pod there as well for you to have a look at. Moving down the grid to Williams, obviously a team that have had a bad 2013 and another team that have struggled with both creating the Coanda effect in their wind tunnel, which stunted their performance at the start of the season, and understanding the 2013 early season tyres as well, like some of the other teams, and perhaps made poor judgments in the way that they approached the start of the season. What Williams are fantastic at, though, is front wing design. Well, I wouldn't say they're fantastic at it, but they have plenty of stabs at it anyway. I think last season they had 8 different configuration front wings. Now, and I'm not talking just minor changes, I'm talking big changes, all to do with the way that their cascade arrangements are set up and considerations like that. Well, on this particular picture we can see 2 front wings. You can place what the difference yourself, but the major differences are the FOM camera positions between the front wing pylons, either here on the new front wing or between the pylons, and will help with the Y250 vortex, which is generated down the centre of the car. On the older specification front wing, which is more like a 2012 front wing, we've got the camera positions on the edge of the nose tip just here. You'll also see that the cascade arrangements are very different on the two profiles. So the new front wing at the top here has serrated edges on the edge of the cascade, which is much larger, and has the curved element that focuses towards the end plate. The slots, or the sections at the base of the wing here, which help airflow underneath the wing and help with the way that the wings generate downforce, but also how they create vortices onwards towards the tyre and help management around the front tyre wing airflow wise, so they create a different type of airflow. A new end plate, so we can see here there's a section just here that's got the end plate allowing the airflow outwards much more drastically in the footplate region. The footplate itself is much more curved element and has a section that develops towards and inwards towards the other vortice generating section. The tail end of the end plate is much more different. We have a circularised section at the top here rather than a much more straightforward deltoid shape just at the top. And then obviously we have the curved cascade just here, which basically helps airflow to migrate outwards. It's very much directed in this direction. There's obviously the loss of the R cascade I talked about here, the R cascade just here, which I talked about earlier. And perhaps the biggest evolution on this wing is the fact of the flapped regions on the wing. So the older specification front wing has this main plane running across here, with a few tiers on the outer portion, but it can't be tiered heavily because of the way that airflow is managed in the multi-sized regions at the bottom of the main plane. We have the next flap up, the first flap, and then we have a secondary flap. Whereas on the new front wing, what we find is that, like a Red Bull or Ferrari have moved towards, there's many more tiers involved. This, I believe, is a 6-tier wing. So we have more sections in the main plane. We have the main flap at the base, like we have with the previous design. But what they've done, like Red Bull and Ferrari, is they've split the design of the top flap so that it will help to make that region more efficient. As we can also see in this difference section just here, they've also got rid of the mini strake that runs in the Cascade region. It's a completely different design, totally different ethos. I personally feel that this is more of a 2014 design brought forward so that they can understand how to create the airflow differences around the front tyre. Obviously the front wing of a 2014 car will be much narrower. We're losing 75mm on either end, 150mm overall, so it will change, but at least this would give them an idea as to the direction that they're heading in. This is the old design, as I mentioned. You've got the multi-sizing regions at the bottom here that help to create the airflow rearwards and help to guide airflow at the base of the car, helping move the airflow around the car and onwards towards the rear of the car. And then this is the new front wing. As I said, there's many differences between it, but this is the mini Cascade that impresses me the most, or leads me to believe that it's more of a 2014 wing, just in how that they've orientated the Cascade so that it would push the airflow out and around and up and over the tyre. Right, moving on to the section of the show where I speak to the people of Twitter and ask them to ask me some questions. Hashtag AskSummersF1. You're more than welcome to send me questions throughout the season, and I'll either try and involve them in the show if there's a show coming up, or if I feel that it's a bit too soon for a show, I'll try and answer those questions there and then over on Twitter. Right, so the first questions are really one question, so I've picked them all together and popped them all into one question. So we've got Bounce Back BLTRX, sorry for these Twitter names, sometimes you can't pronounce quite right, but what was so special about Sauber's traction that enabled it to fend off the Mercedes and Ferrari? Following on from that, we've got Cavallino Rampa 2, or Rampante, where did Sauber's speed come from, as neither Hamilton or Alonso could pass, even with DRS? They must have something new. And then finally, we've got Lee987212. If there were any break point, Hamilton may have overtaken Hulkenberg, and how? I can't wait for your Tech F1 show. Thanks for that. Hope it's impressed you. Now, in answering some of those questions, if we go back to what I was talking about earlier with Sauber, and I didn't really want to cover it too heavily because I knew these questions were coming up. What was so special about Sauber's traction that enabled it to fend off Mercedes and Ferrari? Well, firstly, that's predominantly to do with the way that Sauber have reactivated their 2012 campaign with the return to the 2012 tyres. Obviously it coincided with them reverting back to or not reverting back to, but moving towards the cross-under tunnel that both Red Bull and Lotus use. Theirs is much more like the Red Bull version because they have the encapsulated drive shaft as well, whereas Lotus don't. So it's more of an iteration of that. That particular exhaust configuration, in my opinion, might be the best version on the grid, and that is purely because it isolates many more flows and allows more air into the Coke bottle region, and allows the airflow to be sent down the downwash ramp and stay attached to the ramp itself all the way to the floor, whereas the other teams are having to create what is effectively a splash zone, so the exhaust plume drops onto the floor and then splashes outwards, and I think that's much less targeted than perhaps just being allowed to go down over the downwash into the ramp, stay attached and then migrate over the floor. Obviously, Red Bull have got many variances because they've been working with the RB8 in 2012 in that configuration, and moved to the RB9, which was really just an evolution of that design. But obviously, Sauber have brought that forward. It coincided with the return to the 2012 tyres. They then got back on board with the spoon rear wing, which allows them to have a sort of it allows them to have both downforce and drag reduction because of the way that the spoon is designed to allow more downforce in the central portion and allow less drag in the rear. That was the original design consideration of the C32. So what they've done is effectively gone back to the drawing board, spent a little money on the cross-under tunnel, and effectively extracted more performance from the original iteration of the car rather than what they had to migrate towards to develop with the original 2013 tyres. So I would consider the factor that the 2013 tyres might be the reason why we've seen this swing in and around the midfield, and perhaps the distance that Red Bull have started to pull out from the rest of the teams. Obviously, the next question in here about Sauber's speed is kind of related to the traction issue, because you need to be able to have good traction out of the corner. It's all about apex speed. You get into the apex quicker, roll into the apex, keep the momentum rolling, and then you can continually pull away and create top speed. They had a very small top flap on the Sauber at this particular race as well, so they weren't trying to create a massive amount of DRS effect either. So I think they were more concerned about race pace, and I think that's perhaps where the other team struggled against trying to overtake the two teams, Mercedes and Ferrari, that is. And any break point where Hamilton may overtake Hülkenberg, and how? Well, that's a difficult one because as I've just mentioned, it's traction and an ultimate top speed. The Sauber actually almost seemed quicker in a straight line without DRS than the Mercedes. The only chance that Lewis had of getting past Hülkenberg was either if Hülkenberg dropped off the cliff and his tyres decided to disappear into nowhere, or what he did try was the first corner overtake. But the problem with that was that the straight line speed of the Sauber obviously slightly increased when he had DRS in behind Lewis, and he was still able to create the right line going into turns 1 and 2 to get good traction out. So he was almost straight onto the tail of Lewis as he pulled outwards. Will that advantage carry forward to other races? We'll have to wait and see, but Sauber have done some good things with the way that they've approached their tail end of development to 2013, just because they've made the advantage of what they learned from 2012 and the early part of 2013 and combined those elements to create a better package. I think Korea was a bit of a standout performance from Nico Hülkenberg in the way that he was able to defend. Many other drivers would have capitulated in his position and just given up the position to what is supposedly considered to be better drivers in Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso. Right, next question. This is from Connor, CM Kinley, F1, and Cerulean, or @CleanStrike. Is there still an element to KERS in 2014 in picking when to deploy it, or will it just be a part of overall power? And could you please clear up KERS charging too for this year and next? Way too much noise about KERS-based traction control. Well, I'm part of the reason for that, but I was only floating an if or a but. Moving firstly back to Connor's question. 2014, obviously, I'll probably do a whole new show just on the basis of ERS, power plants, and the new aero that goes into that particular season, because it is quite involving. But to talk about just the ERS and KERS are really quite far departed. The original KERS device harks back to 2009, obviously, and was designed as more of a push-to-pass system to create an overtaking or a defending opportunity, whereas ERS is encapsulated within the actual power unit itself, and will be controlled by the mapping of the engine, and have a symbiotic relationship to the way that both you harvest the power and you use the power, and the designer, the driver will still have some input in that, how that's used, but it will be much more engineered because there's much more power at play. There's going to be about 160 horsepower under the driver's right foot that he needs to utilise. So how we see drivers use the diff settings at the moment, where they're able to control the control of the diff settings throughout the start, middle and end of a corner. I believe that will become much more reliant on the way that ERS operates, and also the way that we see drivers operating their KERS. So you don't always have to use 100%, i.e. the 80 horsepower. You can downgrade that in different sections of the track, and that's how the drivers will speak to their engineers and create a difference on the track depending on how much grip they have, and where they're defending position or needing to save fuel, take fuel, etc. So it's going to be a complex arena, ERS for 2014. There'll be many failures, I believe. There'll also be many bad decisions made on the pit wall and by drivers in the way that it's operated, but it will all help to create a much better formula. In case of the next question, in case of KERS charging, I believe this is all to do with the articles that Minardi wrote, I wrote, Race Car Engineering have now printed, in regards to the way that KERS could be used as a form of traction control. I only floated the idea on the basis of something that I believe is a weak element of the regulations in regards to KERS, being the fact that you could effectively harvest energy under acceleration rather than just braking, to obviously utilise a way of sort of cranking back the power that's being produced. So if you imagine, as the driver gets on the throttle out of the corner, if the KERS is then harvesting as that power's being put down by the driver, you're actually withdrawing some power as well. You're taking some away, and effectively you're creating an element of traction. It's not a traction control system. It would aid in traction, because the only way that it can work is that you would have to modulate the way that KERS is harvested. Is it happening out there? I've floated the idea that, if I was within a team, it would be something that would be looked at. Is it happening? If it is, I would expect every team to be doing it. But I'm not 100% if it is. As I say, it was an idea that I floated. Race Car Engineering have also floated the idea in their latest issue. And obviously Minardi was outspoken about the way that he believes Sebastian Vettel was gaining an advantage over the last few Grand Prix when he was in Singapore. And as I've said in the past, the way that Red Bull have created that advantage is a perfect storm. It's not just one particular component, it's many things that add up to create a better package than anybody else. Lastly, from F1 is my drug, what a great username there. Why do you think Ferrari is going backwards when the Singapore/Korea updates were supposed to close the gap to RB? Being Red Bull, obviously. Ferrari aren't really going backwards, they're just staying in the same position. Whatever they're doing isn't eking out the performance that they need to be able to catch up with Red Bull. And it's the same as the other teams, to gain the additional performance that's needed to overtake Red Bull is monumental. I still believe that they have time in their pocket that they're not utilising. Sebastian manages, every time that there's a safety car or the start of a race or similar, he manages to pull out a massive gap, sort of 2 seconds within a lap, and it's all to do with the way that they're able to produce that downforce rather rapidly, and then they just crank it back and consistently provide what they need from the tyres. So it's difficult to say that Ferrari have moved backwards, because I don't believe they have. I just believe that they've effectively not. They've stayed level with the performance that Red Bull have gained. It's not always them moving backwards. It's just that Red Bull have gained, Ferrari have gained. Mercedes have gained and they've leapfrogged them slightly, and then they move back forward slightly. It's all about the way that the teams develop their upgrades, and it's a monumental task to try and catch up the differential that Red Bull have actually got. Right, so that's the end of the show. A bit longer than the usual show. There's quite a bit to talk about, even though everybody seems to be telling me that there wouldn't be towards the end of the season. I'd like to thank Sutton Images as usual. Mark's fantastic in the way that he allows me to obviously show the images on Twitter firstly, and then obviously use them in the show. Unfortunately, he's not been at the last few Grand Prix because he broke his ankle, so hopefully he'll be back in action soon. I believe he's trying to get back to the Indian Grand Prix, but as usual the team have been getting some fantastic images, and without them perhaps I wouldn't have even come up with the recent Red Bull discovery of the little scroll on the edge of the diffuser. So yeah, I look forward to the next race and hope to see you on the next episode.